Arthur Vance had come to know two kinds of silence. The first was the hollow, aching void that had filled his small mountain cabin after his wife, Martha, passed 5 winters ago. It was a silence that consumed sound, a constant reminder of what was lost. The second silence was the one he shared now with Ranger. It was a comfortable, breathing silence, filled with the soft hiss of the fire, the whisper of wind through pine trees, and the quiet presence of the old German shepherd at his feet. It was a silence built on an unspoken pact, a shared history etched not in words, but in the worn leather of Ranger's collar and the settled grief in Arthur's eyes. Tonight, that peaceful silence was broken. Ranger, who had been sleeping soundly, lifted his great head from the braided rug, his ears swiveling toward the door. A low whine rumbled in his chest, a sound of deep and urgent concern. His amber eyes, usually soft with contentment, were now sharp and focused on something far beyond the cabin walls. "Easy, old boy," Arthur murmured, his voice a low rasp. "Just the wind playing its tricks." But it wasn't the wind. Arthur knew his dog. He had seen Ranger on high alert during his years as a K-9 unit. But this was different. This wasn't training. It was instinct, raw and powerful. The dog rose, his movements stiff but resolute, and padded to the door, nudging the wood with his snout. He looked back at Arthur, his gaze unwavering, and whined again, louder this time. Before Arthur could heave his protesting joints from his armchair, Ranger did something he hadn't done in years. He nudged the old loose latch with his nose, pushing it upward. The heavy wooden door swung open just enough for him to slip through. "Ranger, no!" Arthur called out, his voice lost in a sudden gust of wind. But the dog was already a dark shape, swallowed by the swirling snow and the unforgiving night. Arthur stood at the threshold, the warmth of the fire at his back and the biting cold on his face, a new, more terrifying silence descending upon him. The wind that had swallowed Ranger whole carried a different kind of chill across town. Inside the small, wood-paneled Ash Hollow police station, the silence was heavy with professional dread. Deputy Kate Jennings, her brow furrowed with a worry she refused to voice, traced a line on a topographical map for the 10th time. The line ended deep in the unforgiving terrain of the Iron Cap region. "He should have checked in by now, Grant," she said, her voice tight. Sheriff Grant Miller, a man whose weary eyes had seen too many winters like this one, ran a hand over his face. "Signal's probably cut by the storm, Kate. He got stuck. That's all." But there was no conviction in his voice. They both knew Deputy Liam O'Connell wasn't just stuck. He was smart and capable. But he was also young and chasing whispers of a drug ring that operated in those treacherous canyons. And for 2 days, there had been nothing. Just the static of the radio and the relentless fall of snow, each flake burying him deeper in silence. Miles away, that silence was being defied. Ranger moved not with the frantic energy of a lost dog, but with the bone-deep purpose of a soldier. Duty was a current in his blood, pulling him forward through knee-deep drifts. The scent of pine and frozen earth was soon tainted by something else, the faint, wrong scent of gasoline, and beneath it, the iron tang of blood and the sharp, acidic odor of human fear. It led him to the skeletal remains of the Iron Cap Bridge. Beneath its rusted girders, where the wind coiled like a phantom, lay a broken shape. It was barely human, a mound of darkness against the snow. Ranger approached cautiously, his paws silent on the icy mud. The shape became a man, bound, beaten. A strip of cloth gagged his mouth, his face swollen and pale under a mask of frozen blood. A faint, frosty exhale, no more than a ghost of a breath, proved he was still alive. It was Liam O'Connell. Ranger's training warred with his instinct. There was no handler to command him, only the desperate cold and the fading life beside him. He let out a low whine, then began to lick the man's frozen cheek, the warmth of his tongue a small, desperate act of life. He pressed his thick furred body against Liam's, a living blanket against the encroaching death. Then he lifted his head and barked, not a frantic yelp, but a single sharp report that echoed against the steel above. A pause, then 2 short, sharp barks. He repeated the sequence, a desperate message sent into the void. Back in his cabin, Arthur Vance felt the cold seep into his bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the open door. An hour had passed. The helplessness was a physical weight. Finally, he moved to the wall and lifted the receiver of the old rotary phone, his fingers stiff as he dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice. Evelyn Reed. Her voice was crisp, no nonsense, even at this hour. Evelyn, it's Art. It's Ranger. He explained quickly, his voice strained. He ran out, into the storm. Something's wrong. How long ago? She asked, her tone shifting instantly from neighbor to professional. An hour, maybe more. Not a sound from him. There was a pause on the line. Are you sure, Art? Listen. Don't listen for a dog. Listen for a soldier. Arthur held his breath, straining to hear over the wind, and then he caught it. Faint but clear. One sharp bark. A silence. Then two more in quick succession. Bark, bark, bark. I hear it, he breathed into the phone. That's not just barking, Art. Evelyn's voice was grim, but shot through with a new urgency. That's a signal. Rangers found someone, and we're running out of time. The signal led them not a moment too soon. When Arthur and Evelyn's headlamps finally cut through the oppressive darkness beneath the iron-capped bridge, the scene was one of grim stillness. Ranger, a steadfast silhouette dusted with snow, stood guard over Liam's unmoving form. He lifted his head at their approach, a low whine of relief in his throat, but did not abandon his post. Evelyn was a blur of calm, practiced motion. She dropped to her knees, her years as a combat medic taking over as she assessed Liam's weak pulse in shallow breathing. He's in deep hypothermia, Art. Get the thermal blankets, all of them. While Arthur worked, pulling foil blankets from his pack and wrapping them around the young officer, Evelyn expertly cut away the gag and cleared his airway. They worked in the quiet, efficient language of people who understood emergencies, a silent partnership against the biting cold, until the distant whine of the medevac team's snowmobiles grew into a roar. The days that followed were a blur of sterile white walls and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Liam drifted in and out of consciousness, the world a hazy fog of pain and exhaustion. But in a moment of strained clarity, with Sheriff Miller by his bedside, he managed to rasp the words that would bring his ordeal to its final, just conclusion. My boot, left heel, USB. It was all they needed. Arthur, with Ranger at his side, returned to the bridge and retrieved the tactical boot from the churned icy mud. The tiny drive hidden inside was a bombshell. It held everything. Surveillance photos, delivery logs, names. Within 48 hours, the Crimson Ridge drug ring, which had used the mountain's forgotten paths as its personal smuggling route, was systematically dismantled. Justice was swift and silent, a footnote to the life that had almost been extinguished for it, but justice couldn't heal a shattered body or a weary spirit. That process began not in a hospital, but in the quiet warmth of Arthur Vance's cabin. Liam spent the next 2 weeks in an old armchair by the fire, watching the snow fall outside the window. His physical recovery was slow, marked by the ache in his ribs and the lingering weakness in his limbs. His emotional recovery, however, was something he hadn't expected at all. It came in the quiet gestures of the two unlikely guardians who had taken him in. It came from Art, a man who spoke little but said everything in his actions. He'd appear with a steaming mug of broth, never asking if Liam wanted it, simply placing it beside him. He kept the fire stoked, its warmth a constant, reassuring presence. He would sit for an hour at a time, cleaning his old Ranger equipment, the familiar scent of oil and leather filling the small space with a sense of enduring history. It came from Ranger, who was a constant, living anchor to his survival. The dog rarely left his side, often resting his heavy head on Liam's knee, his amber eyes a steady reminder that he had not been alone in the darkness. And it came from Evelyn, who visited every other day. She came as a doctor, checking his wounds and monitoring his progress with professional eyes. But she also came as a friend, her sharp wit and no-nonsense optimism cutting through the cabin's quiet reverence. One afternoon, as she rewrapped his ankle, she looked around the room. You know, she said, her voice thoughtful, there are a lot of dogs like Ranger out there. Good dogs with years of training, cast aside by departments or left in shelters. They just need a mission. Liam looked at the magnificent animal dozing by the fire. He thought of the bond, the instinct, the loyalty that had saved him. Evelyn met his gaze, a new idea taking shape in her eyes. I've been thinking of starting a proper training center, non-profit, for search and rescue dogs. I'll need help, she added, her look pointed. Someone who knows what it's like on both sides of a rescue. For the first time in months, Liam felt a flicker, not of survival, but of purpose. He looked from Evelyn's determined face to Art's quiet, watchful one, and then to the silent hero at his feet. He wasn't just recovering from an old life. He was seeing the foundations of a new one being laid right here, in the heart of this small, found family. The idea planted that winter took root as the snows receded, blossoming under the long, warm days of a Colorado summer. The old abandoned warehouse on the edge of town was reborn. With a fresh coat of paint and the tireless work of three unlikely partners, it became the Ash Hollow Canine Rescue and Training Center. It was a place of new beginnings, its kennels filled not with the sound of lonely despair, but with the hopeful barks of dogs being given a second chance. This new spirit was palpable at the town's annual summer celebration. The air was thick with the smell of grilled hot dogs and fresh-cut grass. For the first time in a long time, Liam O'Connell didn't feel like an outsider. He stood on the small wooden stage, not as a broken officer, but as a member of the community. At his side, regal and calm, sat Ranger. Most of you know parts of my story, Liam began, his voice steady as it carried over the crowd. But the most important part of that story isn't about me. It's about what it means to have faith when you have nothing left. It's about loyalty that runs deeper than blood. And it's about a hero who never asked for praise. He looked down at the dog. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they have 4 legs and a coat of sable fur. Ranger didn't just save my life. He reminded this whole town that the greatest strength is found in a loyal heart. He showed us that no one is ever truly lost as long as one faithful friend refuses to give up. The crowd was silent, captivated. Liam pulled a small silver medallion from his pocket. It glinted in the afternoon sun. He knelt, his movements sure and graceful now, and fastened it around Ranger's neck. Engraved on its surface were the simple words, "The Silent Hero of Ash Hollow." The town erupted in heartfelt applause, a wave of warmth and gratitude for the man and the dog who had become their own. Later, as the celebration continued, Liam noticed a small boy sitting alone on the edge of the lawn, his shoulders hunched. While other kids chased each other with shrieks of laughter, this boy was a small island of sorrow. Liam felt a familiar pang of recognition, the look of a pain so deep it isolates you from the world. Before he could move, Ranger did. The dog seemed drawn by an invisible thread, walking calmly over to the boy. He didn't bark or demand attention. He simply lay down beside him and rested his great head gently on the boy's knee. For a moment, the boy was still. Then his small body began to shake with silent sobs. He threw his arms around Ranger's neck, burying his face in the dog's fur. Liam approached quietly and knelt. The boy finally looked up, his face streaked with tears. "I miss my dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. He's not coming back." Liam's heart ached with understanding. He put a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "I know," he said softly. "It's okay. You're not alone." The boy nodded, his grip on Ranger's fur loosening into a trusting embrace. At that moment, Liam understood that Ranger's mission was far from over. He was no longer just a rescuer. He was a healer. That evening, Arthur Vance sat on his porch, watching the last streaks of orange and purple fade behind the mountains. The air was cool and clean. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the distant, happy sounds from the training center and the murmur of Liam and Evelyn's voices as they walked up the path, their laughter carrying on the breeze. His small, quiet world had expanded, its walls pushed out by the force of this new, unconventional family. Ranger came and rested his head on Arthur's knee, his silver medallion cool against the old man's jeans. Arthur stroked the dog's familiar, noble head and looked out at the life that had grown from a single act of loyalty on a dark winter night. The hollow silence was gone forever, replaced by the enduring, hopeful sound of home. The story of Arthur, Liam, and their silent hero Ranger serves as a poignant reminder that our lives, much like the seasons, move through periods of cold and quiet isolation. Many of us have known a long winter, a time of loss, solitude, or the feeling that our most vital chapters have already been written. We may settle into a silent routine, believing the frost will never thaw. But this story teaches us that the capacity for a new spring is always within us, often awakened by the most unexpected loyalties. It reminds us that our past, with all its scars and sorrows, does not merely create limitations. It forges a unique kind of wisdom. Arthur's quiet patience, Evelyn's seasoned competence, and even Ranger's instinctual duty were all born from their histories. This is a profound truth for those of us with decades of experience. Our past equips us. It gives us the strength to guide others, the courage to embrace a new purpose, and the grace to understand that it is never too late to build something meaningful. Whether it is a family, a community project, or simply a new sense of peace within oneself. Perhaps the most vital lesson is found in the simple, steadfast presence of a loyal friend. We are encouraged to recognize and cherish the rangers in our own lives, the friends, family, and companions whose unwavering presence provides warmth when the world feels cold. The story shows that the greatest antidote to loneliness is not just receiving love, but having the courage to give it. Opening our door, both literally and figuratively, allows the light to come in. It is in these connections, new and old, that we find our greatest resilience and build a legacy not of what we owned or achieved, but of the love we shared in the lives we touched.